Hey guys, this is Rodeska, and I'm coming to you with a tutorial today for rendering characters from Zbrush in Keyshot, and this will be going over how I render my stylized characters for Keyshot. This is in no way like, you know, I guess you would say like the most professional because, you know, obviously there are probably people that do it way better than I do, but this is something to kind of help you get started with kind of understanding how Keyshot works and how I do it. So, I mean, if there's a better tutorial out there, you know, please consider looking at that. But I haven't really seen any stylized character tutorials in terms of characters like this. They've been mostly like plastic characters that are stylized or product stylization in terms of like, you know, keychains and things like that. So I thought that I would make my own kind of tutorial, and that'll help you guys kind of understand the process a little bit better for rendering inside of Keyshot. So let's get started. Alright, so the first things you're going to notice about my character is that I have a lot of texture variation on my character in terms of the textures not looking very flat. And this is just something I do for my style, but it's completely okay if you want to do like flat textures, or excuse me, flat colors for yours. But the way I'm doing this and pulling this off, and I'll start with the hair, is I'm actually using surface noise. So if you go into the surface noise and you turn this off, you can see how flat the hair is. And if I turn this back on, you can see now I have surface noise. And the way I did this was just UV the hair and then go into my surface noise options and then put a anisotropic texture in here that kind of mimics a hair fall off, so that it kind of makes it look more like realistic hair, or more like, you know, hair. And then I kind of like set the noise scale all the way down, alpha scale a little bit higher, and you can copy these settings if you want to. And I also gave it a little bit of black ambience in between the hair. Now this is for, she has dark brown hair, so if you were using something like, you know, lighter hair, I would say just kind of contrast it in accordance to the color. So if I was using like a red hair, I would probably use like maybe like a dark orange or something like that, just to kind of like contrast it a little better, even maybe something like a little like dark pink or something, just to kind of give it like a natural kind of ambient occlusion kind of look to it, instead of it just being like, you know, just bump surface. It just shows up a little bit better with the textures, or excuse me, better inside of Keyshot. All right, so that's one way that I did the hair. I unwrapped all of these and I basically put them in overlapping each other and put them on the same kind of UV sheet, so they're all going the same direction. And then I just made some very thin flyaways to kind of give her more of a personality, like maybe she doesn't really care about her hair looking perfect, and stuff like that. So yeah, just a little bit of flyaways and things. And then I also gave her some surface noise on her jacket. Now with clothing, you want to unwrap this according to how you're going to place your surface noise. So if your surface noise is going to follow in a certain direction, then maybe you want to unwrap it according to that. Usually you can get away with seams in your textures when it comes to clothing, but I try to hide that as much as I possibly can, to where you're not really going to focus on that, because it just, you lose immersion when you you know, see the seams in this stuff. So if you wanted like a full jacket that was seamless, maybe you'd want to put the seam back here, and then underneath here, and just try to unwrap it underneath the arms, so that when you do unwrap it, everything kind of unwraps as a planar unwrap, and gives you less seams in the end, and gives you more of like a seamless kind of sweater. But of course, you're not really going to notice that because it's clothing, and clothing is obviously cut up so that you don't you know, so that you get seams obviously when it's stuff. But if it's like a knitted thing, maybe it was all knitted as this, so maybe it's not going to be as cut up. But yeah, you just want to kind of like put the seams somewhere where you're not going to see them. So for example, I go to the socks, and the socks, as you can see, I put a seam along this, but again, you can't see it because this is a tiled texture. And not only that, but all of these vertices line up perfectly with each other. So as soon as the texture comes back to these vertices and meets, you have less likely of a chance of it you know, having a seam right through here. But I did also add seams in the shoe area where you're not going to be looking. So as you can see, like my seams are actually inside the shoe, so you're never going to really see these. here's a perfect example right here of it being cut off in the texture. So it will, like, you will have seams, but it's less noticeable. It's less noticeable, you know, in the final result because of what's going on here. But anyways, I have a seam right here. As you can see, the texture is being split up. So you're never really going to see this, and also down here you're never really going to see any of that because it's inside the shoe. But if she was going to take off her shoes or something like that, I'd probably do a little bit better of a job unwrapping that to where you won't notice it. And then obviously the last is her clothing. I have, you know, obviously a bump on the clothing to make it look more like clothing when it's being rendered. Even in here, it kind of looks like clothing. And I used surface noise with alphas with all of these. Especially the shoes. So the shoes were being used, like, I made a low poly version of the shoe. No retopology, just low poly versions of shells that I made inside of Zbrush, and then I unwrapped all of these shells. And then what I did was I took that unwrapped shell, and you can prioritize the inside from the outside to get more resolution on the outside of this if it helps. But you're never really going to be that close to the shoes. But then we went in there and we went into Substance Painter with the shoe, and I created an alpha surface noise map, or an alpha map that I then plugged into here. And that allowed me to have these extra little details that I made inside of Substance Painter, like the stitches and the, you know, the Chumps logo and, you know, all of that stuff. I'm not really sure if that's an actual logo, but, you know, I'm using it. And also I did the bottom of the shoe detail in the same place. Now if you mix that with a color, you can also make all of those one color. Now it's not going to work too well if, you know, if you're wanting to make all of these different colors, like maybe the laces will be white and then these will be maybe gold or something, then it's not going to work very well because obviously this only works with whatever the alpha sees. But you can still go in and color over these. You don't have to color blend these. You can just do this, use the bump and then color over the bump in the high poly. But again, I'm using that color for this to get kind of like a neon look. And then I, you know, bump it up a little bit, not too much, because, you know, you don't want to make it too high poly. But yeah. And I also did that same thing for the shoelaces. As you can see, I made surface noise for the shoelaces. Now, if you do make surface noise, you can actually go in and hide the surface noise by masking off. And if you don't want to see that inside of Zbrush, you can just Control H and hide that, and you can see how it's going to look. But you got to be careful about that, because if you do that and you forget where your masks are, you're going to move the model and then you're going to mess up your model. Okay, and then the last but not least is the skin texture. So I made a custom alpha, again inside of Substance Designer, that is basically like a bunch of variated spots that aren't too contrasted. So they're not too white and they're not too black. They're just kind of like gray, dark gray kind of spots. And then I'm multiplying that inside of her skin to give me the variation inside of her skin. And that's also giving me a slight bump in her skin. This will help with kind of getting rid of that like same surfacey look inside of Keyshot. So if it's just like one color, then you want to kind of break up that color with a little bit of surface noise, or excuse me, noise in the texture, so that it's not just all one color. Okay, now again, you don't have to do any of this. You can just simply render your character the way we're going to do it. All right. Also, for the skin, I'm using the skin shade. And the reason why is because the specularity has a nice kind of like blue specularity fall off with some nice ambience and a diffuse. So I'm using that for the main skin color. And then the rest of this is just an ambient color that we'll be using. So it's just basically like an ambient color that's going to be transferred over, and then we're just going to use the default ambient color. But all of these matte caps are going to transfer over to Keyshot, minus the wax modifier. So you're not going to see the wax modifier get applied, but everything else, the color, the surface noise, everything like that will be transferred over. So even this noise in the texture in the hair will also be transferred over. Okay, so I also need to make sure that these are the same color as the hair so that it doesn't get confused as to the materials, because it's going to sort by the materials, and then it's going to be like, okay, well, what material do you want for the hair? What material do you want for the brows? And I'll show you that in just a second, okay? So now that we got all of that out of the way, we're ready to transfer this model over to Keyshot to set up our rendering. So we're just going to go up to our render, and make sure you also have the bridge for Keyshot. I'm using Keyshot Pro 4 Zbrush, which is a special version of Keyshot that you can buy for Zbrush specifically. That helps you kind of bridge back and forth between Keyshot and Zbrush. So we turn on all of these, and then we go Shift R, or we hit BPR, and that will transfer all of this data over to Keyshot automatically. Now, as you can see, Keyshot is opening up, and it is loading our model. If you want all of this stuff better organized, it's better to go inside of Zbrush and rename all of your subtools so that you kind of know what everything is inside of Keyshot. But I didn't do that, so we'll just be going off of I, and that's good because then I can show you a little bit more techniques for getting better renders. Okay, I might actually just speed it up right here so that you don't have to watch this load. So I'm going to pause the video, and once it's done loading, I'm going to unpause. Okay, now that we're back in Keyshot and everything is loaded up, you'll see that we have a really bright background and a kind of dull character in terms of the colors. So that's my fault inside of Zbrush. I kind of dulled down the colors a little bit, simply because if you make them too contrasted, then the contrast that you're going to be adding inside of Keyshot is going to be overly contrasted and overly dark or blown out, which means your pinks will like start to become like maybe a red, and then that'll look kind of weird. So when we do start to contrast it, everything should start to look a little bit more kind of stylized and a little bit more toon style. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go up to my edit. I'm going to go into preferences, and then I'm going to go to hotkeys and switch that over to Maya. You can switch it over to whatever you like. If you're using like a ZBrush setup, maybe you want to put it on ZBrush setup, but I'm going to leave it over in Maya because I'm more comfortable with those controls. Simply working with Moto and Blender using the Maya hotkeys. So we're just going to save the changes, and now I have my hotkeys. You can also pan, dolly, and tumble up here if you have these options available. If you see options up here, or if you don't see options up here in your little toolbar menu or your little bar menu up here, it's probably because you haven't added them. So if you want to add them, you just go over here, right click to an empty space in your little bar up here, and then you can check any one of these that you want to add. So I can add the scripting console, and you can see that it's going to pop up, and if I uncheck it, you can see that it disappears. So just remember that if you want to add any of those options, you can completely customize this and add the options that you mostly use. And to be honest, I don't really use all of this, but I just like looking professional, and I like adding all this crap up here for just absolutely some stupid reason. So I'm going to go over a little bit of things that you probably already know about, but basically a couple of these things are new inside of Keyshot. You obviously have your GPU, your denoising, as well as a couple of other features, like you now have this toolbar up here. I believe this is new, as well as some other things inside of here. So you have your UV unwraps now, and then you also have I believe that's all. Maybe something else that I don't know about, but yeah, you also have your unwrapping. So if you didn't unwrap something, you can unwrap it here. Just be wary that unwrapping is kind of weird inside of Keyshot, but if you have something low poly that you want to unwrap, then go for it. But my experience is that the unwrap doesn't do that well, right now at least. It doesn't do very well when it comes to really high poly meshes, but of course that's just speaking from my experience. All right, so yeah, now we have our character model in here, and it's we're ready to go. So up here you have your perspective that you can sit here and you can change. This is the camera that we added from ZBrush, and I'm just going to change this to about 60 to give us a little bit of perspective. So kind of like what perspective is it's basically like if you have something in the back, like more towards the back or to the background, so let's say her finger is more towards the background, then that's going to be looking like it's even further back. So let's say you want to get like a sword in the shot, then maybe you want to like bring up the perspective to kind of make it look like it's more kind of a flat kind of perspective. So if we bring this all the way up to like 200, then she is super flat, you know, we can see pretty much everything. But if we want her to make it look like she's kind of zoomed out, dynamic and everything like that, you can see how crazy we can go with it. This is a little bit too crazy, like, you know, maybe if you're doing some crazy stylized art where you want to kind of fit her in there looking like Elvis, then maybe you want to do that. But of course we're just going to leave it at 60. That's a nice kind of like even amount between you know, being kind of like flat but also being kind of like dynamic. Again, you can set it to whatever you want, but I'm going to set it to 60 because I want to basically see everything that she's doing, but I also want to have a little bit of perspective in there to kind of give it like that rounder kind of look. Okay, then the next thing that we're going to do is we need to supply ourselves with a more contrasted background so that we can start working with the materials with the background and the lighting. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my window, I'm going to go to library, and I'm going to open up my materials, or you can just press M, and that's going to open up your material library. Now if you hit space, you can get rid of your menu over here, and if you hit space again, you can bring it up. Also, if you hit F, you can fill the window with the entire Keyshot application, or you can undock it. So, you know, if your UI ever gets all crazy, just, you know, tap F a couple of times and, you know, maybe that'll help you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our environments, and I'm going to say interior, and we're going to use one of these interior environments. I like using the bathroom environment because it has a nice kind of like fall off of yellow lighting. It has a nice kind of like gray bluish lighting, and it has white lighting, which gives us a little bit of contrast lighting in it. So it's a nice kind of like balance between blue, yellow, and contrasted like whites and stuff like that. So if we go to our environment tab so that we can change our environment lighting, we can actually go in here and change our environment lighting settings to change the brightness so we can make it more bright. We can change the contrast to make it more contrasted, which is going to choke the lighting. I'm not going to do this in the initial overall settings of the environment. I'm going to keep everything at 1, but what I am going to do is I'm going to go over to my HDR editor. I'm going to change it here because it's more effective in this area than it is in this area right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the brightness. As you can see, it's way more effective. We're getting more brightness, and then if I get it even more kind of contrasted, you can see how it's becoming even more contrasted. So if we can turn on our render and we can drag these points, we can start to see like how she's becoming even more contrasted. So if we bring this up even more, you can see how contrasted the lighting is becoming. So we kind of want this to be a little bit more contrasted, and we want the brightness to be a little bit more up. Okay, and then we can also use rotation and rotate the main lighting right here. So I'm going to use this as kind of like a main lighting. We can rotate that towards her face to get it directly onto her face. Okay, that's good. Right, we can also add a little bit of saturation, so we can make her face even more blue if we wanted to, making it look even more nighttime. And we can also change the saturation color. So let's say, you know, hey, maybe she's walking during the dawn, or maybe she's walking into a nightclub or something. Maybe we can change it like that and have some really crazy lighting onto her, which gives you a lot of you know, different options. But I'm just going to leave it a little bit slightly blue because she is walking at night, and the background is going to be completely a bluish color. Okay, so we're also going to go back to our settings. We're going to say color, and then we're going to change this to a darker color. So we're just going to mess around with this. I don't want it to be overly saturated, but something that's going to complement her kind of like colors. Okay, and there we go. I think that's pretty good. And the cool thing about this is that we can actually move these little sliders right here to get kind of a more accurate color. So if we want to give it more like desaturation, we can turn it over to the brown area. If we want to give it more of a saturated color, we can bring it over more towards the blue. If we want to give it more of a reddish color, we can. If we want to give it more of a bluish color. So just like learn how to read these. You can also do RGB, which will change red, green, and blue. But I usually do this one because it gives me kind of like, I can go into the blue, but then I can also get some red in there. So it doesn't go necessarily from like a green to a blue to a red again. It usually kind of fluctuates between kind of nice complementing colors, which is why I use it so much. All right. So I'm feeling like the contrast is a little bit too much, so maybe we can bring down the contrast a little bit more. Okay, maybe we can bring up the brightness a little bit more. This is just something you're going to have to play around with. And as you can see, if we zoom into her hair, we're actually getting that noise texture in her hair, so it's looking a little bit more realistic. Obviously not uber realistic, but we're still getting that kind of realism. Okay, so here's your camera. This is where all your camera settings are going to be. If you want to have depth of field, you can click on depth of field and you can set the focus. So if we click on this and we set the focus to maybe her nose, we can also go to done, and then that's going to set the focus. I don't really need to set the focus. I think honestly what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this off for right now, and we're going to also turn off region so that it renders the entire thing. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to need to set up these materials. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this skin material. So this is just going to be our skin, and I'm going to hit enter, and now as you can see we changed that to our skin. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to unlink these other ones. So if we actually go over to our scene view and then we open this up, well, we should now be able to select these. So you'll notice it's selected by the orange outline around the object. We can now select these, and now we can right click and we can say unlink the material. So that's going to put its material in its own group. So now if we go down here and we double click on this, you can see now we have a group that says ZMAT that we can now use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say sweater, just so we know that it's the sweater. So now we can have the sweater right here, and then we can just do that same thing. So it's not going to allow us to just drag the material onto here, because if we do, what's going to happen is it's going to delete that and it's just going to reapply the sweater all the way through the other material. So what we want to do is we want to unlink everything that the sweater is going to be related to. So also the hoodie. So I'm going to unlink the hoodie as well, and that's going to be the sweater material. So now if we do this, if we go to our sweater material and we just apply that to those two, we can then change the options, and you'll notice that only those two options are going to be changed. So now we have our sweater material. I'm going to leave it like that just so that I know that I'm already done with the sweater being applied. But I'm going to do that same thing for the rest of the stuff. So I'm going to unlink the clothes. Go to material, go to unlink, and then we're going to name this clothes. So double click on the clothing and we're going to name this the clothing. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for the socks, because maybe we want to add fuzz to the socks as well. So we're just going to right click on in here, go up to material, go to unlink material. Same thing for the shoes. Unlink the shoes, material, unlink. We have to do this to both the shoes because they're two different shoes. Unlink. But once we apply the material to both of these, then they'll become one material. They'll be linked together. Okay, maybe we also want to do these to the shoelaces. Material, unlink, material, unlink. Okay, so for the socks, we're going to name this just socks. Okay, and then we're going to name this the shoes, because maybe we want a little bit of sheen on the shoes. And then for the shoes, we're going to put that on the other one so that it changes both of them. And then for the laces, maybe we want like a little bit of fuzz on the laces, so we're just going to say laces. And then again, I'm going to put that over here to this one. So now that should delete it. Just checking, double clicking on both the shoes just to make sure they're both named shoe material. Okay. We should have our skin. And then we should have... Okay, so the cigarette is also a part of its skin, so we also need to unlink this one as well. So unlink the material, and this will be our cigarette. And this one's going to be the cigarette cherry, so we're just going to say cherry. There we go. So we have all the materials already set up. And we should also have a different material on the eyes. And if you notice, if we go back to here, you'll see inside of here we have a reflection in the eyes inside of the material. So what I'm using for that is I'm using a reflected plastic and just a little bit more ambience on the plastic. So that's all I'm using, just so it gives us kind of like that nice kind of like feeling of just a reflection in her eyes instead of it being like a, you know, completely dead looking eye. So that should show up in the eye, but I'm not entirely sure if it will. It may not be enough reflection to show up. It shows up a little bit. It's not enough reflection to show up. Maybe you want to put a little bit more reflection in there, but if you want to give her some specularity in her eyes, you can just turn this up to about, I don't know, right about here. You can see we're getting a little bit more reflection in her eyes through the HDR, so that's good. But we're not getting enough on her direct eye, or at least where we want the key. But we'll be doing that a little bit later on. Okay, so we're gonna start with I guess the sweater, since that's the hardest one to work with. But let's just put this back at white, just in case. And we're going to save it right here. So we're just going to go File, Save As, and we're just going to save it as like, I don't know, Stylized Render Tutorial. We're saving it because if anything were to happen, we need to be able to load it back up. So I'm going to pause the video while it's saving, and then I will see you guys back. Alright, so it is done saving. Now we're going to start with the sweater material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a little bit of ambience. So what ambience is going to do is it's going to take anywhere that is basically like an ambient shadow, and it's going to fill it with a brighter color. So as you can see right here, if we solo this off, I believe by alt clicking, yep, we can solo this off, and you can see that we're getting a nice kind of ambient red in there. So we can change this to maybe an even, I don't know, dark kind of bluish color, and we can get that nice kind of like ambient fall off for the, you know, the blue. So that's going to be a little bit of a nicer kind of color, and we can add a little bit of specularity to this to get to see the bumping a little bit better, and we can change up the roughness a lot more. So it should be pretty decent. So I'm going to actually change this to maybe like a yellowish color, just because somewhere I heard that, you know, yellowish colors work red with blues, or excuse me, reds or pinks. And since our lighting is more bluish, I think that a yellow tint to this would be good. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe set up the transmission. So we're going to have a little bit of diffuse transmission. This is going to bump up our render time a little bit, because it's going to need to calculate the diffuse or the transmission. If you don't want to put it in there, that's completely fine. It's up to you. But I'm going to kind of put in a little bit of transmission to say, hey, this sweater is not that thick, and light passes through it a little bit. So we're also going to bump up the specularity transmission a little bit more. And that's going to have the light pass through the object a little bit more. And we're also going to maybe change that roughness value a little bit. Okay. So we're going to go in here and we're just going to turn on everything else. And for right now, that's good. I'm not going to apply the fuzz right now because it does take a minute for the fuzz to calculate. We'll probably be playing a little bit more with that diffuse transmission in a moment, just to see how our lights handle that transmission. But right now, it seems like it's doing pretty okay. So it may be a little bit too much, but we'll see. All right, for the clothing, we don't really need to do anything. I mean, you can add a little bit of like maybe blue ambience to complement the black lighting. And then maybe even add just a little bit of red, or excuse me, purple to it, so that it's more complemented. But again, doesn't really matter. And then for this one, we're just going to add a little bit more kind of reds to this. And then for the shoes, we're going to add just a little bit of specularity. Maybe blue. And then roughness. Way up. Let's turn down that specularity more. So just grab this one and turn it down a little bit more. And then for the ambience, we're going to add a little bit of just to give us kind of like more cartoony lighting. Okay, and I also notice the ground plane is it's not that great, so Control S to save. And we're just going to pause it while it saves. Every time it saves, we're just going to keep pausing. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to change the ground plane. So we're going to go over to our environment. We're going to go to our settings, and we're going to make sure that our ground plane is like a nice bluish color to, again, complement our lighting. So now we have this nice bluish color for our plane. The reason why I'm holding off on doing the skin and the fuzz is because those are the ones that are going to be taking the longest to render inside of here. So we'll be doing those in just a moment. Okay, so let's double click on our cigarette, and I'm just going to make this a little bit more of a brighter color, just a brighter maybe white color, maybe a little bit yellow, simply because it's too dark in here and I don't like that. So I'm just going to be making that a little bit brighter, and then I'm going to double click on this, and instead of an advanced material, we're going to set that to an emissive, just so it looks like it's more of just glowing. And then we're going to set this to maybe like a red color. So we're going to go here, we're going to say blend with color, and we're just going to make this a more red cherry color. That way we don't get that weird white kind of glow in there. Okay. It does also look like maybe my faces on here are a little bit low poly. And since I really don't want to go back inside of ZBrush and redo all this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to if you have everything like perfect, all you need to do is just make sure everything inside of ZBrush is perfect before doing this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to say edit normals, and then in here I'm just going to make sure that it's 45 degrees and then just make sure it's smooth. So you can bump this up if you have, like, you know, you want it to be sharper faces, but since this is fine, I'm going to apply that, and that's going to give me the smooth faces so that it's not, you know, noticeable. Okay, you can also do that on whatever you want if you have like a low poly character. Alright, and I also think I also need to make sure that these are also unlinked as well, so I'm just going to go in here and say unlink material, and then we're going to say for this material we're going to say hair short, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the lashes, just to make sure. Okay, where are you? Unlike material, and that way I can go to hair short and then put that onto these. There we go. And then we can go into here and we can just drop this all the way to black, so it shows up more black. All right, so for the hair texture, or for the hair material, what we're going to do is we're just going to give it a little bit of specularity. Okay, and for that bump texture, should be fine. I mean, you can go in here and add an anisotropic to it and then kind of mess around with these settings. Maybe even drop this low and mess around with these settings if you want to get like a really, really good kind of like hair texture. So just keep dropping that pretty low. And also changing the roughness. Maybe we can have this at 1. Have this at 1, see what it does. Maybe drop this up a little bit higher. Because what it's doing is it's filling up the whole thing, and I don't want it to fill up the whole entire hair texture, which is why I'm kind of changing that. Okay, let's try 12 samples. Let's drop this low, drop this lower. Just check it out. Yeah, see, I don't really like the way that's going. I mean, that would be pretty good for like metallics and stuff, but for hair, it doesn't look like it's doing that great of a job in terms of making the hair the way I want it, because I want a small thin streak through here. I don't want like a small white thin streak through here making it look like it's actual hair, but this doesn't look like actual hair. This looks like it's just like it's filling up the entire thing, which is weird. I would really much prefer it to be like super thin, but not as rough as this. Like this is super, or this is super like, I don't know. I guess we can change these and get it to where we want. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And it's still filling up the entire thing. I don't really want that to do that. But if it looks good in the end, then I am not going to complain about it. It's still really reflective to me. Feels like it's really reflective. I don't really want it to be that reflective. Maybe we can just drop this a little bit lower, have it less reflective. But it still looks like it's going throughout the entire thing, which I don't really like that. Because with the other one, what I could do is I could set transmission through the hair and make it look a little bit more better in terms of lighting. So I like the anisotropics, but it seems like it's more geared towards metals than it is towards hair, so we're just going to use the advanced. And with this one, we're going to, you know, bump up the specularity a little bit more. Okay. And then for this we can set the transmission. So we can go down here and we can set the specularity transmission. And I want this to be a nice kind of like blue fall off for the transmission. Because her hair is dark and there's blue lighting all around her hair. So I want the hair to look like it's literally absorbing that blue lighting and passing it through. Okay. And let's change the roughness transmission. And then we're going to change this to maybe like 32 samples. I think that's okay. It could be better. Okay. And then maybe we can apply some ambience to this. Some purple ambience. This is definitely going to be a minute to render, but we're already like starting to see a pretty decent result. It's not the best result, but we are seeing a pretty decent result. I still feel like the hair is a little bit too slick and a little bit too wet looking, but that's fine. We'll be messing around with that a lot more in the future. Okay, so let's double click on her skin and let's add a little bit of translucency to her skin. So with this, her skin looks a little bit too white, so I am going to blend this with a color, and we're going to blend this with maybe like a kind of obviously like a skin tone. So we're going to try to get a skin tone in here. I don't want it to be too dark in terms of lighting, so I think that's pretty good for now. And then we're going to change this to a translucent material. The translucent material basically passes the lighting through it, I believe, and then it calculates it. So we're going to say the surface is actually what we want to be our skin color, since we are now using this. Let's change it right here, and let's just try to get that skin colory look. Okay. That's okay for now. And then we obviously want this to be a lot brighter. So let's try to make it where we're going with it. Okay, so like right around there. That's fine. You guys probably colored your skin better than I did. Now we're gonna make the surface obviously like a redder color, maybe a little bit more pink, just so it's not too harsh, but you can make it a little bit more red if you want. And then we're gonna set this to 3. I think this is all based on the size of your object. So if your object is really small, then this is probably going to be a lot larger. But if your object is object is really big, this is probably going to be a lot bigger of a number. But if it's really small, it's probably going to be a lot lower. So you might want to mess around with that to see getting this kind of effect. So we're just going to add a little bit of specularity to this. That's going to be like a bluish color, like the skin color inside of Zbrush, and we're just going to bump up the roughness value to about 0.2 to 3. So 0.2 to 3, 0.2 to 0.3. And then down here we're going to set this to about 1.64. So 6.4. So that's going to give us a little less of refractive, I believe. That's going to kind of make her skin a little bit thicker so the light doesn't pass through so quickly. And then we're going to make this about 32 samples as well, and we're also going to apply global illumination so that the HDR affects this. We're also going to save this so that we don't get any issues with crashing or anything like that, and we have to reload everything. So I'm just going to save this, and then I will see you after it's saved. Alright, so now that it's done saving, we need to start adding a little bit more to her. Again, we might actually go in and play around with these, but we also want to turn on our global illumination. You can turn that on right now, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this for when we're ready to render. That way I'm not bogging down the system with a bunch of stuff that I don't really need. But you can also turn on performance mode if you want to get out in and around quicker, and it doesn't, like, you know, bog down your machine too much. And then you can turn it off if you want to. But as you can see, it's going into like performance mode as you're moving it around, and then it renders when you want to see it fully. But since we're going to be working with geometry now, I'm going to put it in performance mode, and we're going to open up the geometry window by going to window and then going to geometry view, or you can press O, and that's going to pop up our geometry view, which is for some reason just her hair. Okay, I don't know what's going on with that, but let's just turn everything back on. For some reason that did that again. I hope I don't have to do all this stuff with her skin again. I have to do all this stuff with her skin again. You gotta be kidding me. Oh, why did that do that? Let's see, what if I just go to, nope. Redoing it will not work for some reason. Alright, well, let's just do this again real quick. Don't know why that did that, but okay. Subsurface, a little bit red. So a little bit pink. A little bit blue. 0.64. 2 samples, and then put this to about 0.2 to 0.3. Okay, there we go. That was easy. And then a global illumination there. All right, don't know why that did that, but okay. Oh, and this also at 3. There we go. All right, so we're gonna go here. We're gonna go to geometry view, and does that load everything back up? All right, so we're all loaded up in here. Yeah, sure, why not? I'm going to switch to bounding box view because for some reason geometry view is loading slowly. Maybe that's just how it works. Yeah, you can change the color of your UI in the preferences, but you can also change the geometry view color if it's too bright on you. You can go in here and you can say darker or lighter or, you know, light. But I like to go with darker because it's just easier on my eyes. And we can also load in a madcap, which is pretty cool, as well as I'm trying to go to madcap. There we go. I'm wondering why this is going so slow. Maybe it's because I'm recording. But usually it doesn't go this slow. It usually goes pretty fast. Maybe madcap with color. Let's just go with shaded. Huh, interesting. It's really chugging. I don't know why that's doing that. That has never done that before. I'm wondering if it's because of the textures. Huh. Flat. Maybe that's gonna work. That seems to be working a little bit better, so we'll just go with flat. Sorry about that. Alright, and then what we'll do is we'll go to edit, add geometry, add a disk for her back. So this will be our backlighting, and what the backlighting usually does is it captures the silhouette of the character so that you can kind of see the silhouette and it doesn't blend with the background too much, and it kind of makes the silhouette pop out more. That's really helpful for seeing, you know, what your character's overall shapes are going to look like. So you pretty much want to get used to adding a backlight, or as people like to call it, I think they call it a rim light, so that you can, you know, see the silhouette of your model a little bit easier. And we're going to click on this little icon right here, and this is going to be our moving tool that we can then position behind her. And the way lighting works is it usually works off of geometry inside of Keyshot. So you want to add, like, you know, geometry, and then you just add a light material, and we'll go over that in just a second. If you click on scale, you can then scale it, and I usually like to scale the rim light pretty big. Just keep in mind that if you have stuff that's like right here, try not to clip the lighting through the object, because what's going to happen is the lighting is going to get captured within that object, and it's gonna cause shadows that are just really weird. So make sure you're prioritizing the light before the object or after the object, not inside of the object. So if it was like this, if there was something behind her and it was like inside of the object like this, it would cause some problems, very, very bad problems. So you want to make sure that this lighting is it's pretty good ways away from her if you have an environment object that's going to be around her. You know, you want to make sure that this thing is pretty far away. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say okay. And I also want a side lighting right over here to focus her side silhouette when we're making renders from this side. That's going to help us capture the silhouette from this view. And then we're also going to have a key light that's going to be directing your attention towards her face. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my scene. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to say duplicate. Okay? That's going to duplicate the object. and then we can just move this over, and it's going to be sharing the same material, so again we have to unlink these materials if we want different lights. Let's go here, let's go about here, and it doesn't have to be so uniform, it could be any way you want. I'm going to just tilt this a little bit and maybe tilt it this way a little bit just to kind of capture more of her face rather than the back, because this one's capturing most of the back. This one I want to more capture her face on this side, but not too much because I don't want to blow out her face with like this big light on this side. Okay, and then again we're just going to actually, you know what, I'm going to make an open circle. So the last one is going to be an open circle, so we're going to go to geometry, add geometry, and we're going to use a disk open. And this is going to be our key lighting that's going to capture most of her face where we're looking at. So we're going to go to here, and we're going to start to move this around. So we're just going to position this right around here. And the reason why I'm using an open circle is because this big old circle open part is not going to be lit. So it's going to capture lighting around her face, and it's going to light up her face mostly around her face. You know, streamers usually use these for capturing like a nice kind of lighting around, you know, their face and not having like this bright light directly on their face. So that's one of the things that's really good for this. It's almost like if you take a flashlight and you shine it right on your face, then you're obviously going to have this big old freaking, you know, reflection right in the middle of your face that's going to look weird because the middle of your face is the most oily. But if you have a disc light, what's going to happen is it's not going to focus all of the light in the middle of your face. It's going to focus it around your face. If that makes any sense. Probably doesn't. Sounds pretty dumb. So about there, we might actually start changing this up depending, but about right around there is where I want it. And then we can start changing it up depending. Okay. And again, I still haven't added the fuzz to the jacket. I'm going to leave that for just a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our area lights to this. Okay, I'm just going to turn on tumble so that our left mouse is automatically our tumbling effect. So if you click on these, what's going to happen is this is going to default your left click. So if I'm left clicking and I'm using this, it's going to pan, and it's only going to pan if I activate that and I start left clicking and dragging, it's only going to zoom in. And if I activate this one, when I left and drag, it's going to activate my tumble. So I usually use this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my materials and I'm going to add a light to this object. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to add the same one to this, and it's going to ask me a material with the same name is already in use. Do you want to link the materials? And I'm going to say no, I don't want to link them because I want this to be a different color. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this one, and I'm going to also say no to that one as well because I'm going to have these as different colors. Now if you accidentally click yes, all you have to do again is just go to your disk, right click material, and then unlink it. Okay, so now that we have all three of these, we can then start to set up our lighting. So for this one, I'm going to set up more of kind of like a bluish toned lighting, and we're going to hit OK. And just to get out of performance mode so that we can see our lighting effect, you can see that it's not taking effect, it's not hitting the actual character. And the reason why that is because it's set to lumen, and you have to turn this up pretty large in order to actually get an effect. So what we're going to do is we just set this to watts, and that's going to immediately brighten that up. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for this. We're just going to set it to watts, and we're going to set it to like a kind of bluish, kind of greenish tone. Not too green though. That's going to light up her silhouette. And then for this one, we're going to set it to a yellow. So about right here. And I kind of want that to be like kind of like a mixture of like the cherry kind of yellow. So it looks like the cherry is kind of making a little bit of that reflection, but also the lighting from the streets are also helping to make that. So just something to think about. And we're going to set that to watts. So now we have all these lights, but we need to kind of tone this down a little bit because it's way too strong. So you can tone it down through here and just turn down the temperature, or excuse me, turn down the color to like a darker color. But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to change it right here. I'm just going to, I want this to be a little bit brighter. Oh yeah, you know what? This is still watt, still lumen. So we want to change it right here. Change it down. Okay. Now we also don't want this to be visible in the camera. We don't want these three things to be visible in the camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off visible to camera. I'm going to do the same thing for this one, visible to camera, and change this one visible to camera. So we just want to be able to see her. The only problem with this is when you start dragging in materials and you want to apply it to her, it might catch the lighting, so you have to be careful about that. And if you want to work with the lighting again, all you have to do is just go in here and you can either double click it in here if you can find them. They're hard to find if you double click, but if you just go in here and double click, you can go immediately to the material that you want to mess around with. So I'm going to double click and you can start to mess around with this. So I believe that this is the backlighting. So we're just going to kind of, well, I want this to kind of be like a big focus for her. But I don't want the disk open to be so harsh. Okay, so we're just going to turn that down a little bit, not too much. All right. And then for the other one, this one, maybe we can tone that up a little bit, but saturate it a little bit more. Okay. And see, as we're getting into this, we're starting to notice things. Like as soon as we start adding the lighting, we're starting to notice things like maybe the translucency is a little bit too harsh on her hair. Her color right here is a little bit like too dull. I want it to be a little bit more saturated. So we're starting to notice these things, and we want to obviously change these things a little bit more. So I'm going to start to go onto here, and I'm going to turn down the diffuse transmission for that, and we're also gonna bump up the roughness a lot more, and maybe also turn down the specularity. Okay, so we're starting to notice things. Okay, obviously this is a little bit too much. So we want to bump that down a little bit less, and then also maybe desaturate it a little bit more. Okay. And for the ambience, I think that the ambience should be just a little bit more blue. And I still think that the hair is a little bit too reflective still. Okay, let's change this one. All right, let's blend this one a little bit darker. Whoa, it's too dark. And then add a little bit of pink to it. There we go. It's going to add a little bit of pink. And then this one's also going to do the same thing. So just going to blend this with a color and then add a little bit of pink to that as well. not too much. Again, don't want to blow it out. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Her skin also could use a little bit more saturation. Okay. Alright, let's save this off and make sure we don't lose our progress. Okay, now that that's saved, I did notice something while I was saving, that the light position for her eyes is just kind of weird. So I want to change the environment rotation a little bit so that it's more kind of like away from her iris on this side. I still want it to be a little bit in the iris, but I don't want it to be like the focus, because it's like really kind of really inside of her iris and it's really weird looking. And also for the disc open, I don't want it to be directly on her eye. I'm going to try to see if we can make it look better, so maybe a little bit over and a little bit more up. Okay, it's definitely looking a lot better. Let's see how that looks. No, a little bit over. Let's grab the region tool and just set it to about right here. And then I'm going to open up the geometry view so that I can edit this. Okay. Working with the geometry is a lot better inside of the geometry window. And we're going to do this one. We're just going to change the position of it a little bit more over. And up. Almost as if she's looking at it. Okay, that looks good. Maybe I want the rotation to be a little bit more. Let's try that. We might also need to duplicate the open disk so that we can get that same reflection in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that. Just go to duplicate. I'm just going to make another one and then we can move that around. Let's go to geometry view. And let's just move that over slightly. And then rotate it so that we're getting kind of like the same reflection over here. And I kind of want to shrink this one down. See what happens. You know what? I got a better idea. Let's do this. Cancel that. Let's delete this one. Since we are getting both of them in there, could probably just move this one over. It's a lot of finagling kind of stuff. Trying to figure out what's like the best way to go about it. Yeah, I might actually have to just keep it like that. Okay. Let's go to... I wonder if I can just... Yeah, there we go. Let's make this a little less saturated. There we go. Okay. Turn that off. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do is we're just going to apply some fuzz, and then we're going to do some post-processing. So we're just going to double click on the material. We're going to go to our material graph, and in the material graph, if you have Pro, this is where you're going to set up your geometry, which is what your fuzz is using. So we can go to geometry and add displacement, bubbles, flakes, or fuzz. I'm going to use fuzz, and we're going to plug that into the geometry. And you'll notice that once you plug it into the geometry and you start to change the settings, it should have a little thing up here that, you know, you're supposed to refresh the geometry. I don't have that, so I'm wondering why that's doing that, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with length variation, turn the length down, turn this up a little bit more, turn up the random, turn down the radius a lot more because I don't want these to be super thick, turn down the density a lot more, and then we should be good to go with that. And also I'm going to change the colors to a kind of like desaturated purple for both the reflections. Maybe we want the reflection to be more, I don't know, like this. We'll see. Right, that's not popping up, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to execute geometry, and that should build it. But you should see like a little execute geometry button up here. If you don't see that, then just go down here to the execute geometry and that will execute it. Okay, so we're going to wait for this to do that, so I'm just going to pause it while it does it. Okay, so now that that is done, we're going to have a look at it, and it actually did a pretty decent job right off the bat. I'd say that the density could use a little bit more density, but all in all, that's pretty fine. I don't mind that. I am going to bump up the rim lighting a little bit more, so we're going to go to the first disc, and we're just going to bump this up a lot more, just to get more kind of translucency in the ear. I think that'll look pretty good. And yeah, all in all, I think that this is pretty decent. Still think that she could use a little bit more brightness in the environment setting. So let's just go here and turn up the brightness a little bit more. And maybe we want to change the background color to be a little bit brighter as well. Usually with stylized characters, they are overblown, kind of saturated, and stuff like that, and they are lighter. So maybe we just want a little bit lighter of a color to show off more of her. I still think the ambience for her skin is a little bit low, but if we go over to our lighting and we turn on our ground illumination and then we turn on our global illumination, we should get some pretty decent lighting for the skin. As well as, I'm going to turn off ground illumination. As well as for her skin. So let's go in here and let's actually turn this a little bit brighter. Okay. Now for her skin, in order to get it a little bit brighter, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into her materials, and we're just going to set up a couple of things. So I'm just going to go in here to, you can also disable these. So if you go in here, you can disable the link, and it'll disable the actual color itself. And also, if you hover over one of these, you can hit C, and that's going to only show you what this is doing. It does that for any one of these, so I can hit here, and you can see just this, the effects of just the translucent, and also, you know, whatever else you put in here. So we're going to right click, and we're going to go to material, not material, textures, and we're going to add an occlusion, and then we're going to go right click, textures, and we're going to add a curvature. So the occlusion is basically anything the light is not hitting is going to find those areas, and it's going to give you a value based on a white to black value. So we're going to do a utilities, and utilities is usually where you hook up all your nodes and then you do most of your work in. So if you're adding bump textures, you want to add bump textures together, then you'll use bump. If you want to change the color of a texture, you can use color adjust. If you want to color composite, you can add two textures together and hook them up to this and composite them together. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to use a color composite, and we're going to hook up this to our source and then hook up this to our background. And then we're going to hook this up to our main translucency. Nothing is going to change because we haven't started compositing yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a render region, and I'm going to zoom in on the character's face, because that's where all of the magic is happening for what I'm trying to do. So we want to zoom in on the face, and then we're going to hit C so that we can only see the face and what's going on with the face. So we're going to go to overlay and just check out to see what that does initially. And overlay obviously is probably one of my best options because it just does a pretty fine job. But you can see that there's black shadows in there, and that's not what I want. I want color shadows. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise these to be, you know, whatever color I want them to be. And I kind of want her to have like a nice kind of fall off for her shadows. So maybe I'm going to add like a pinkish bluish color to those and just drop those a little bit lower so that we're kind of getting more of a stylized kind of like shadowing on her. We're going to hit OK. So any occluded area is going to be black, which, like I said, if the light doesn't hit it, or if there's a shadow in there, it's going to calculate it as a black or a white, and it's going to use that value to calculate it. So we're also going to go to fall off, and we're just going to kind of soften that out a little bit, and you can also change your radius to be smaller or larger radius depending. So I'm going to make it a little bit larger, and we're going to calculate that. So if I turn this off, you notice we can see those blue kind of like shadows in those areas. It's not too shabby, and also inside of her nose as well. Not too shabby. I still think she might be a little bit too shiny, but that's okay. And then what we can do is we can go to our curvature. So our curvature is just calculating the contours and the cavities of the map, and it's again creating a value based on red and blue. So blue being, I believe, the contours, and then the cavities are red. So with the cavities, we want those to be red or like a pinkish color, so that inside the cavity areas we can get kind of like a nice kind of skin fall off for those. So we're just going to go here, and we're going to go to utilities, and we're going to go to color composite, and we're just going to again composite these together. So before we go into our translucent material, we're going to go over here, and we're just going to again source these together and plug these in. So now we have these two. So instead of seeing everything together, we're just going to hover over this, hit C, so now we can only see these two together. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go here, and maybe we're going to do a multiply at first so we can kind of see a little bit better, and you can see all of the contours are blue. We don't want that. We want these to be like a, maybe like a, I don't know, yellowish color, more closer to our skin color. And then of course we want these to be red, but maybe we want them to be just a little bit more pink and a little less dark. Okay. And the cutoff determines where it cuts off at, I believe. So if we turn this all the way up, we should see a lot less of it. And I'm going to turn up the radius, or excuse me, down the radius, so we can just affect a little bit a little bit less of that. So if we start going all the way down with the radius, you can see it's just like no radius at all. And we're going to turn this up to like, I don't know, 16 samples, so double the amount. Again, all of this is going to, in the end, process. So when you turn up your samples, it's going to add to the time that you need to render. Okay. Should be good, but yeah, let's test it out. Let's just see how it works. So we're pretty much adding all of that together. Maybe we can do a lighten or just mess around with these settings. I think soft light would probably be the best, because soft light we're getting those nice shadings and we're also lightening up the skin, so I think soft light would probably be the better option. Okay, so after that, you kind of just want to mess around with it depending on your own specific needs. Maybe you want to add textures to it, like maybe some actual lip texture, like, you know, roughness and stuff like that. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just finagling and messing around with it and getting it to be the best that you can possibly be. So pretty much now you're ready to render it, and you know, if it doesn't look good, again, just go in there, adjust it however you need to make it look better. But usually, if you can get it looking as good as this, you know, before you've even had a chance to render it, then over here you have these different styles. So now you can sit here and you can mess around with contrast, high contrast, low contrast, linear, different things like that that'll help you. Denoising will actually denoise it, and then it'll refresh every, like, I believe it's 5 seconds. So it'll go, it'll denoise it, and then it'll wait 5 seconds, and then it'll do it again, and then it'll wait 5 seconds, and then it'll do it again. So it's just basically slowly giving you detail within the viewport. So you can do that, I believe. You can also play around with the saturation and stuff in here, as well as the bloom. So you can add bloom if you have like cigarettes or lights in there that like I do, and it'll do that. As well as chromatic abrasion, which is something that a lot of artists that do realism like to use. They use this a little bit on characters so that it gives them a nice kind of like blurry effect, as well as going into your camera and again setting the depth of field and things like that you want to set. Okay, so this has been Rodeska, and this is how I render my stylized characters inside of Keyshot. Hopefully this helped you out. Please leave a like if it did. Please, if you have any questions or anything like that, leave them in the comments down below, and I will get to you as soon as I possibly can. And yeah, definitely, hopefully this helped you out a little bit more. All right, take care, guys.